Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Boys. I am one of your co-hosts, Connor Nielsen, and joining me, as always, is the Comics Kid, 2099. How are you doing, Comics
I'm
Kid?
doing very well, Connor, and yourself?
You know what? I'm doing pretty well. Today we are talking about a kaiju flick, a mid '60s Showa era Ishiro Honda directed Toho production. This is not a Godzilla movie, but a sequel. But because of the way Toho kaiju sequels work, it's not exactly. You don't need to have seen the original. But this one's called The War of the Gargantuas. This is a Twin Peaks adjacent podcast. We went through every episode of Twin Peaks at some point or another, plus some other bells and whistles. And now we are talking about movies and TV shows that Twin Peaks actors have appeared in and other maybe behind the scenes people have worked on. This one features Russ Tamblyn, who played Dr. Jacoby on Twin Peaks in the TV show and the first two seasons, the original and the revival, season 3 in 2017. Comics Kid, why don't you explain the plot of The War of the Gargantuas?
Okay, so it starts off, there's a guy out on a boat, and then a giant squid attacks the boat, and then this giant, hairy Frankenstein-type monster attacks the squid, and then the Frankenstein monster attacks the boat. And I call it a Frankenstein monster because that's what the people in the movie call it, but it really just looks like a giant Yeti. And there are, about halfway into the movie, you find out there's actually two Yetis. There is one that is green, that's the one that attacked the boat, and it is kind of the bad one. And then there is an orangish red one, or brown depending on the lighting, and that is the less evil of the two Gargantuas. They don't call them Gargantuas in the movie, they mostly just call them Frankensteins in the movie, but basically, Russ Tamblyn is a scientist, and there are several other actors in this movie who I did not recognize, but if you are a hardcore kaiju fan, you might recognize some of these actors and actresses. The actress Kumi Mizuno, she was in a few other monster movies from around this time, playing different characters, I believe, but I didn't recognize most of this cast except for Russ Tamblyn. But basically, you have scientists who are trying to figure out, is this the Frankenstein creature that we created and raised a long time ago in the movie Frankenstein versus Baragon or Baccaran or something like that, and then also trying to help the military figure out how can we destroy these monsters. And there's a couple of hiccups along the way to their quest of trying to destroy the monsters and save Tokyo. So Connor, neither one of us had seen this movie before, but you are much more of a fan of giant kaiju movies, specifically, I would say specifically Japanese monster movies. So I'm curious what you thought of this movie.
Yeah, this is not just a kaiju movie. This is kind of one of the kaiju movies. So the history behind something like this is a little heavy, so I'm going to put on my smoking jacket, whip out my magnetic pipe for all of you Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla fans. That's a reference to that. So in the mid 60s, in order to appeal to international audiences, there was a sort of a co-venture between Toho and an American producer with like some American international studio. And the idea was that we were going to have like some like 3 movies that were Japanese productions, but they featured one American actor, and that would increase the international appeal. And then at some point, the international distributors from America would be able to put those Japanese films into either television or theatrical distribution in the States and elsewhere. So that's why this movie is kind of a classic, is because a lot of kids I think this didn't reach the States until the late 60s, but a lot of kids that are say my dad's age, on Saturday mornings, they would watch this because this was one of those movies that had easier access to the US. They were able to get a dub. I think doing research, there were actually 3 dubs done of this movie. This one was not released until 2017. But I'm kind of going all in different directions. But the other two Toho International American Pictures, I believe is what it's called, um, co-ventures were this Godzilla versus Monster Zero, aka God or Invasion of Astro Monster, and then I think the third one is uh, Frankenstein Conquers the World, aka Frankenstein versus Baragon. So yeah, I think those are the three. And the American actor in Frankenstein Conquers the World. I'm just gonna like that's the thing about these like movies. They have all of like different titles depending on which region they're releasing in. So for America, everybody like I remember seeing the trailer for Frankenstein Conquers the World all the time because I had a lot of VHS tapes of I didn't own them, but I would rent VHS tapes all the time from this era of Godzilla, including Godzilla versus Monster Zero, and it had trailers for Frankenstein Conquers the World, but it's actually called Frankenstein versus Baragon. Um, so Frankenstein versus Baragon and Godzilla versus Monster Zero, they had Nick Adams as the white guy, and then this movie features Russ Tamblyn. When I say this is like one of the kaiju movies, this is like one of the few like kaiju movies that you saw that was regularly syndicated in America. So I remember when you had picked this movie, you had said that Brad Pitt said that this is one of like the first movies he
Mm-hmm.
ever watched, and I think that's why. So this movie does have a special place in a lot of people's hearts, um, and a lot of people's idea of what a kaiju flick is in Western parts of the world. Um, like this is one of those movies that informs that. And Ishiro Honda is sort of like the godfather of kaiju movies. He created Godzilla, and he did a lot of the Showa era Godzilla films, which this is also a Showa era kaiju flick. Um, I feel like I'm putting it off because I actually didn't like this movie a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot, which kind of breaks my heart because this was right up my alley. I think that like inherent mid '60s kaiju charm aside, um, I had a hard time finding anything to like uh, because I've been watching through like all 15 of the Showa era Godzilla movies this last month with my brother in preparation for Godzilla versus Kong. But I've been watching through like all of them, and aside from like two, I've been at least mildly enjoying to greatly enjoying all of those movies, especially the Ishiro Honda ones. The aforementioned Godzilla versus Monster Zero, aka Invasion of Astro Monster, is like I think maybe one of my favorite movies that's ever been made because it is like pure camp schlock perfection. And that came out like a year after this movie, or maybe the same year. And I love it to pieces. And I mean, I also love even some of the ones that people really don't like. Like I really enjoy uh, like Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, and I really like Godzilla versus Gigan. That movie is like the Man of Steel of kaiju flicks, where it is like the most thin, bare bones plot, like a single act stretched to feature length. Then Godzilla and Anguirus finally arrive on the mainland after swimming there for 20 minutes, and then like the last half of that movie is nothing but like four guys in suits just like beating the tar out of each other, stitched together with like maybe just as much footage of stock footage being repurposed, and it is like hilarious and awesome, and the monster fight is like just completely insane. And it feels like Man of Steel because half of that movie is just people hitting each other as well. So um, yeah, I've been going on for a very long time. I'm sorry. I love me my kaiju stuff, but watching this was a bit of a letdown because I was excited about it, and I've been watching a lot of this era of kaiju flicks as well, and so I was just kind of expecting this to fall right in line, but it did not. Comics Kid, how did you feel about the War of the
Well,
Gargantuas?
unfortunately, I also did not like this movie. And I should point out, I mentioned I was going to try to do some homework before watching this. At one time, I am 90% sure that Mothra, the original Mothra movie, was available to watch for free on YouTube, and that was also directed by this gentleman. But then whenever I went to go watch it, it was a situation where you had to pay money for it, and I didn't want to do that. So I didn't get to watch Mothra, but I did watch the original Godzilla movie. More more specifically, I watch the version that has Raymond Burr in it.
Oh
You probably
no.
know more about that than I do because I don't know. I guess there's at least two cuts of that movie, and there's one of them where the token white guy is a character named Steve Martin, who is a reporter in Japan, and I actually really like that movie because as a monster movie, it is like completely different than every other monster movie, not only from that time period, but like every time period. Like it is so different than anything else that came afterwards. It's inventing a genre, but also the genre completely like foregoes what that movie does. So like I could probably do a video just talking about that. I haven't, but I guess I could. But that movie feels so different than this movie. Like I'm still kind of having problems reconciling in my brain that they were both directed by the same person. This feels like, some people have off days. This feels like Honda had like an off like year when he was making this movie. I did not really enjoy it. So I guess it's entirely possible we might have different reasons for not liking it because for me, I don't think that giant monster movies are for me because the thing is, if you're going to have two characters fight, I want to know why they're fighting. In Captain America Civil War, I think that does a pretty good job of saying here's two people who were friendly enough with each other, but now they are on opposite sides of this thing that's going on, and now they're going to fight each other. And I think that movie does a pretty good job of establishing their motivations and building that off of previous movies and then saying now they're going to fight each other. I think that movie does a good job of that. With monster movies, the problem is twofold. One, the monsters can't speak. So I don't know what drives Godzilla, and I don't know what drives King Kong. And so it's going to be very interesting when we watch Kong versus Godzilla, and they're just going to be punching each other for 2 hours, and I'm not going to know why, unless the movie does a really good job of telling us why. So in a movie like this, you then have to rely on your human characters. But the problem with that is most fans of monster movies don't care about the human characters. They don't want to see the humans. They just want to see goofy monster antics. And so this movie, it kind of pulls its punches in both ways because you've got the monsters fighting each other for reasons, but then it also has the humans on screen, but the humans don't really do very much in the movie, and I do not find myself attached to any of the human characters in the movie. And so I feel like it's failing to grab my inner 5-year-old that would love to see a bunch of monsters fight each other, and it's also failing to grab my adult self that says, okay, if some people are going to fight, I want to know why, and I want to have actually compelling characters. And so it's kind of failing on two levels, I think.
Well, yeah, and I think what makes a good kaiju flick is an entertaining human plot.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of people don't actually know what a kaiju flick is like, and so they'll say, "Oh, I don't care about the human characters. Just give me some awesome monster fights." Like, all right, if that's your standard, you could just like get up and leave, except for 20 minutes of the
Mm-hmm.
movie. And I mean, those 20 minutes could be awesome. Don't get me wrong, but like a very entertaining human plot in a kaiju movie, I think, is severely underrated, and people don't realize how important those are. For example, the plot of Godzilla versus the sea monster is there is this guy whose brother is lost at sea, but he's convinced that he's still alive. So he goes to a dance-a-thon where prizes a boat, and so he goes there, and then as he's arriving, it's going on, so he can't enter it. But there are these two guys who just lose the dancing competition after dancing for almost 72 hours straight. So they're exhausted. And they're like, "Whew, man." And they see this guy, and he's just kind of sitting there like a psycho, like without speaking, just like staring into the distance. And they're like, "Hey, can we help you?" And he's like, "I'm looking for my brother. I gotta enter the competition. Where's the boat?" And they're like, "Oh, chill out, dude. We know where you can find a boat." So they go to like a dock, and they get on a boat, and then there's like a jewel thief on board, and then like the guy ends up like the guy who's looking for his brother ends up stealing the boat with the jewel thief and the two buddies on board. And then for like the next 5 minutes, it's just like a high seas adventure movie where there's like some like intrigue as to like, wait, what's in this guy's briefcase? Is it the jewels that just got stolen? What's going on? And then a giant like lobster smashes their boat, and then they wind up on an island where basically all the jewels that had gotten stolen are now at the bottom of the ocean, so it doesn't even matter that it was a jewel thief. And then there's like basically an occupying military force on this island, and now everybody has to run away from. And it's like really fun because like every scene is like a new development, and maybe like two scenes, one of those new developments just gets dropped completely, but like it's still fun and entertaining, and every scene has something to engage you in. And then they just stumble upon Godzilla sleeping in a cave, and then eventually they're like, "Oh, okay, there's Godzilla." And then like 20 minutes later, they're like, "We need to wake up Godzilla." And so then they like find a way to wake him up, and then Godzilla just kind of stumbles around and fights some monsters on the island, and it's fun. It's like that's like what a good monster plot should do. And like my aforementioned Sweet Sweet Love Invasion of Astro Monster, like a stuff where like two astronauts, and the astronauts, the Japanese astronaut, his sister is getting married to kind of this guy who he sees as dweeby and is not going to be able to take care of the sister. But that guy is an inventor, and he basically creates a supersonic rape whistle. And then, but meanwhile, the American astronaut, he's dating this woman who actually turns out to be an alien, and his girlfriend kidnaps the brother of the other astronaut's sister, or the boyfriend of the other astronaut's sister. And then like it's like this really hyper involved like alien conspiracy plot, and then on top of it you have giant monsters attacking the city, and it's really entertaining, and all the pieces kind of fall into place in a very fun way. um, this movie, like, it is what Mike Stacklasa of Red Letter Media says all B movies are. 90% of it is like boring people in lab coats just explaining what's happening, and 10% of it is like people in suits like stumbling around miniatures.
Yes.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said that it doesn't give your 5-year-old, like inner 5-year-old, a reason to care, and it also doesn't give your adult self any reason to care. Like when I said there are inherent mid 60s kaiju charms, like that's the stuff you're going to find all across the board with this. Like you see the strings holding like the helicopters, and you like the strings like kind of lifting up like a prop octopus or something, and all that stuff I love the fake uh, octopus. I love the makeup. I love the miniatures that the Frankenstein creatures stomp all over. I love seeing them stomp all over the miniatures. I love the little like laser beams that shoot out of like little cars to try to deter the Frankenstein monsters. Like all of that stuff, I am all about. But all of that stuff I just said, you can see just as charming everywhere else. Plus better monster fight choreography, plus a more entertaining human plot, plus better pacing, plus a shorter runtime, pretty much everywhere you look. So like I don't know why somebody this day and age would choose this over a plethora of others now that we live in like 2021 and you have much easier access to all of these
Mm-hmm.
movies.
Um, I guess it's a good chance whoever's listening to this probably hasn't seen this movie. So, like, to kind of break it down even more than what we did earlier, I've never seen Frankenstein versus Baragon. Have you?
No.
So, like, I didn't even know this was going to be a sequel until a character said, he gets on the phone and says, "Get me the Frankenstein expert." And I immediately said to myself, "Oh, okay. I need to back up. I need to figure out what's going on here." But like so we find out like Russ Tamblyn and this other lady, they were involved with creating this little Yeti creature. And what we are told in this movie is that the Yeti creature escaped somewhere in the Himalayas, and then it vanished. And so now the media and the military, they think that these two scientists and there's this other guy, they think these three basically created this monster that has now killed some people. Because it sank a boat, and at least 4 people died on that boat. And then later, the green Frankenstein monster, it picks up a woman, and I am 99% sure it bites her head off. Because we see him like raising her up to his mouth, and then like 1 or 2 frames later, he spits something out of his mouth, and I couldn't tell what that was, but I think he bit her head off. And so a very violent creature. But like Russ Tamlin tells somebody, I think he tells someone on the phone, no, it is absolutely impossible that this monster is the one that we created. It is 100% impossible. And then the news people come in and they say, is it possible this is the same creature? And he said, well, it's possible. And and then like that's the first half hour of the movie is Russ Tamblyn and these scientists saying, well, maybe it's the same monster. We don't really know. And then at one point, finally, this other guy, he says, you do whatever you want. I'm going to go investigate this boat. And he is like the closest thing to a proactive character in this entire movie. And so he finds some seaweed on the boat. And then using science, he determines this seaweed came from a monster that like lives in the sea, an amphibious creature that cannot like live away from the water. Like it can get out of the water for a little bit, but it has to go back to the water. And so he says, okay, it's 100% sure this is not the monster we created. And then we spend like another 15 or 20 minutes with everyone saying like, well, maybe like, okay, maybe that's not the monster you created. So now what are you going to do about it? And I was thinking, what are they supposed to do about it? They didn't create this monster. So like now it's up to the military and like elected officials to figure out what needs to be done. Why are the news people asking this scientist who had nothing to do with this monster? And then later we find out that the orange and brown one, the one that they created, it's maddening. Russ Tamlin says it's possible that it scraped its leg on a rock, and it's possible that some flesh fell off of the wound, and then it's possible that that flesh mutated into the green monster, and so it's possible that
like completely
yeah,
regenerated.
and like it's there is no science involved. This is a scientist who's saying, I guess maybe this is what happened. And then like, but then like before that, all the news people are like, what are you guys gonna do about it? And I was thinking like, what should they do about it? They're scientists. They study like a baby monster drinking milk. Like they don't know how to kill them necessarily. And so like, it's just a really bizarre like it's not entertaining, like you were saying. Like the first 30 minutes is just maybe this is the monster we created, or maybe it's not. And there are plot points and like twists and turns that come much later in the movie, but by the 45-minute mark, I can't imagine that anyone is still invested in what's happening when we find out, oh, there's a second monster. And even if you somehow have not seen like any of the promo material for this movie, it's called War of the Gargantuas plural, so you know there's going to be another Gargantua. But then they don't show that until 45 minutes in. Like it's just a really bizarrely like structured movie.
Yes. To just to reference another one of the many Godzilla movies I've been watching, in a much more entertaining plot. The plot of Godzilla versus Megalon is the underground nation of Seatopia uses space monsters that are able to contact through the Easter Island heads and summons space monsters to wipe out the surface world so they can take over. Meanwhile, an inventor has created a robot named Jet Jaguar, and with the help, so Jet Jaguar flies to Monster Island and tells Godzilla to come to the mainland to fight Megalon and Gigan, and Godzilla just agrees, and then swims to the mainland, and then Jet Jaguar just decides to become sentient and just wills himself to grow to kaiju size, even though he's just normal human size. And then Godzilla and Jet Jaguar fight Megalon and Gigan for 50 minutes, and then afterwards Jet Jaguar sizes back down and decides to no longer be sentient. It's glorious, and then a Jet Jaguar spaghetti western song plays at the end, and then it says, "While the credits roll." It's amazing. It's what cinema should be. And then you have this where the monsters suck. Like, and this is the thing. I think the monsters suck. Like, I don't like the Gargantuas. I think they're boring monsters. Like for the first hour, I'm like, what's the problem here? Lights scare the monster, and then after you have like a scene where like they're shining lights at it, and it's like, ooh, like hiding away from the lights. Then it just like starts showing up at places and starts crushing stuff, and I'm thinking, where are your lights? Like, why aren't you just like packing lights around, tracking this monster all the time? But then later in the movie, after like the other Gargantua shows up, they're like, oh, the lights no longer work because now it associates light with food. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess this is the development
And
now. So how about you just lure the lights away from, like, just lure the lights on like an autopilot raft or something all the way out, so it can just be perpetually chasing that. I don't
And
know.
when they find out, oh, the monster likes lights now, they somehow forgot to tell the entire city of Tokyo, don't turn your lights on anymore. And so at some
Yeah.
point, like they hear sirens and Russ Tamlin is about to turn all the lights off, but then he sees everyone across the street turning their lights on. So then he calls some guy, and some guy tells the general, hey, you need to issue an order. And general says, oh, okay. And then that's the scene. Like it's a weird thing where I'm like, why did this make it to the script? Why did this make it to filming? And why did this make it to editing? Like there's three different levels where that whole like 2 minutes could have been taken out of the movie. And like it's a really I don't think we are doing it justice by saying how strange it is. Like, and part of the strange is going to be because it's a 1960s kaiju movie. Because even the really good ones are going to be really odd, right?
Yeah.
I'm not nearly as much of an expert as you are in this, but I've seen a few. I've dabbled here and there. I've seen the Mystery Science Theater episode on Jet Jaguar, and so like I kind of know about this stuff. But looking at it as like a real film, which maybe I shouldn't do. Maybe I should just turn off that part of my brain. But I'm asking myself, why is there a 45 seconds or whatever where the general has to be reminded that the human beings haven't been told that the monster likes lights? Like, it feels like they're just like, we need to have, this needs to be an hour and a half long. Let's do whatever we can to stretch this thing out.
Well, and that's just the thing. Is like you had mentioned that the structure is very odd, and you're right. But like what makes the best Godzilla movies work is that like the plots are nonsense, but like in the scene, you can understand why the things are happening, and even later if you go, wait, that actually doesn't make sense because while it does follow this one line of thinking, there's like five other things here that could have just ensured that the scene never would have happened. Like in my sweet, sweet beloved Godzilla versus Monster Zero, the big reveal is that the aliens have been here the whole time, and you're like, whoa, it's a big conspiracy. But then while you're watching it, or after you watch it, you think, well, if they were here the whole time, why'd they bother with the whole like first half of the movie with like jumping back and forth between Earth and Planet X? I don't know. But while you're watching it, you're not necessarily thinking about that. With this, like you are thinking about these things, and I think it comes down to like the human plot is not entertaining and the monster
Hmm.
sucks.
Yeah.
Um, like the monster, like they just show up and they just shoot at it for like a few minutes, and then it runs away, and they shine lights at it, and it runs away, and they shoot at it some more, and this time the monster like throws tanks that don't move out of the way at some houses, and like I don't know, it's like I'm not a fan of this thing. Like I think a good monster has like some personality and has like maybe a cool design. I think I'm not a particularly big fan of like the way this monster looks, but on top of that, it just kind of reacts like to everything, or it'll like step on a rock and go whoa or something, and like that's its reaction to everything. And like it's very hard to describe why. Like I can hear all the arguments like for this movie. Oh, shut up! Don't apply any critical thought to this. It's just about giant monsters hitting. Well, okay. The other like the two monsters don't meet each other until like an hour into this
Yeah.
thing, and then like they don't really start fighting until there's like 25 minutes left, and then after like they kind of get into a quick tussle, they then don't start like the full on war with each other until there's like 10 minutes left, and even then their fight sucks. Like I'm the expert in this, okay? I have seen enough of these monster fights to like grade this on a curve. Like this is like less impressive than the Godzilla Raids Again fights, which is the first time Godzilla and another monster ever fought. And like they were still trying to figure out how it would work, and so it just kind of looks like a couple of dogs like wrestling with each other. But like this is like that's better than this. This is like you think that like okay, these are just two guys in makeup and goofy costumes. Like it's not like these people do not have the cumbersome rubber suits like on top of them where they can barely breathe out of them. Like like the fight should be awesome, but they're not. They just kind of run at each other and violently hug one another until they both fall over and start rolling
Hmm.
around. And that's the fight. Like it's really kind of boring. Uh, Similarly, in like Godzilla versus Monster Zero, King Ghidorah and Godzilla are fighting, and then Godzilla like starts boxing him, and like he like takes the stance of like an Irish boxer, and then starts like punching each of like Ghidorah's three heads like set like a boxer, and the choreography is fun. Or like Rodan will pick up Godzilla, fly him over Ghidorah, and then drop him on Ghidorah. Like they get fun like that. And Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, the movie before Godzilla versus Monster Zero, the larva Mothra crawls onto Rodan's back, and then so they're using her as like a a uh, a flying silk turret, so it can like spray like so Mothra can spray Ghidorah with like the silk to like wrap him in a cocoon while Rodan is like flying her around, so it's easier, so it's harder to hit her. And then while that's happening, Godzilla can get up behind Ghidorah and pick him up and throw him around and stuff, and it's awesome. It's great. There's nothing like that creativity here. And so when you said it felt like Honda had an off year, like that's it, I feel the same way. Like I'm looking at these other movies that Ishiro Honda directed that are also monster movies that I felt were much better. Now apparently Russ Tamblyn made the set kind of like a
I've heard that,
disaster.
yeah.
I read up a little bit on it, but even still, I think there are some aspects that are just sort of like before you even get to shooting that are just not as creative or fun as other kaiju
Well,
flicks.
and you describing, like, I'm in my mind, I'm picturing Godzilla holding a giant caterpillar like a machine gun and like squirting like ooze out of its mouth towards King Ghidra. Like I'm imagining that, and that sounds so fun. And this movie, like you said, it's just a couple of Yetis hugging each other, and like Russ Tamblyn being a nightmare on set has nothing to do with the monster design or like choreography of the fights. Like that might have to do with like the Japanese to English translation and vice versa in the human scenes, but that wouldn't have anything to do with how awful everything else is about this movie. To piggyback on something you said earlier, like it's 45 minutes into the movie before we see that there are two Gargantuas, and then there's a whole lot of, I won't say arguments because it's not especially intense, but there are people saying, well, I think we should do this. And then there's someone else saying, well, I disagree. And then it's like, oh, okay. And then that's that's about it. But like, have you ever seen the movie Reptilicus?
I have
Okay,
not. No.
I have seen the Mystery Science Theater version of it, and so I felt I don't know which came first. They were both in the 60s, but I feel like whoever came second definitely watched the one that came first because this movie you find out like if the creature like sheds a skin cell, that skin cell is going to regenerate into another creature. So we can't blow it up with a bomb because then you might have like 15 new gargantuas pop up in a little bit of time. And so we have to come up with some other way to kill the monster. And that was like a plot point in Reptilicus. And Reptilicus generally isn't very good either, but at least in Reptilicus, they have real world weapons that they are using against the monster. And so when they realize, wait a minute, we can't use these weapons against Reptilicus because anything we have is going to turn it to pieces, and then we're going to have more Reptilici on our hands, and that's not good. But in this movie, they have this magical electricity gun that doesn't tear the monster to pieces. It just shoots like electricity at it, and it just like weakens the monster, but it's not tearing his arm off or anything like that. And they're arguing like, well, how are you going to attack the monster if we tear its arm off and it creates a new one? And one of the military guys said, well, I thought we could just use heavy bombs on it. And I was thinking, but you have an electricity gun. The electricity gun was shown to weaken the monster without tearing it to pieces. So why aren't you just using that? Why is this even a discussion? And like that to me, like, and apparently the Mazers, that's what they're called. Apparently this is the first kaiju movie to use the Mazers. And you'll have to explain to me, like, do each of these movies take place in the same world? Like, this obviously takes place in the same world as Frankenstein versus Baragon, but do they both take place in the same world as Mothra and Rodan and Godzilla, etc.? Because, like, if the Mazers show up here and then they later show up in a Godzilla movie, that would make me think that they do take place in the same world. But then, like, these guys are all saying, like, you know, like at the very beginning of the movie, the guy who survives the boat attack, he says, a giant monster attacked their boat. And the military is like, enough of your lies. What really happened? But if this is set in the same world with all these other monster attacks, then shouldn't he be like, oh no, another monster. Alert the president immediately. We've got, someone just said a monster sank his boat, and we believe him because we've seen dozens of these things in the last 10 years. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, let me tell you what the reason they can take place in the same universe is this sweet device called stock
yeah,
footage. When the Mazers showed up, I'm like, oh, I've seen these shots before. They were in Godzilla versus Gigan and Godzilla versus Megalon. You know that shot where like the Green Gargantua was like crawling behind trees while like the Mazers like just like cutting the trees in half as
yeah.
it's tracking him. I've seen that shot like 3 times in the last 2 days. Like I'm like, oh, that's used in both Gigan and Megalon, and I guess it started here, unless it actually started in or Baragon versus Frankenstein, in which case the stock footage of that. You can usually tell when it's stock footage in another movie because like the film itself like just will all of a sudden be different, probably because the film's been around
Mm-hmm.
for a while and been copied and now it's being reused, so like it's going to look a little degraded. And this does not look degraded at all. So I was like, okay, I think this is the original like patient zero. um, So yeah, like it's a little ambiguous as to the universe. They play fast and loose with continuity, and Baragon shows up and destroy all monsters, but I'm pretty sure like most of Baragon's appearance in the stock, it's its own continuity up until the monster shows up, and then when they have like the technology from the other movies, now it takes place in that same world too, I guess. So
Okay. But then, like, I looked it up. Reptilicus came out in 1961. This came out in 1966. So
okay.
maybe Honda saw Reptilicus. I don't know, because it's probably well known as being one of the only monster movies from the Netherlands. And so maybe he thought, well, those guys think they can come in my territory. I'm going to watch and see what they do. And then he's like, wait a minute, that's kind of a good idea. I'm going to write that down. And so, like, in 66, he straight up steals the idea of the military being, like, told off and, like, no, you can't use that weaponry on the monster because that'll just make things worse. But, like I said, when you have sci-fi weaponry that doesn't blow the monster into a bunch of pieces, then that whole conversation just becomes nonsense. But I feel like I got off topic earlier because when the second Gargantua first shows up, or rather, the Gargantua from the previous movie, but he's the second one in this movie. When he first shows up, he like goes over and cradles the green monster, and he's looking at the humans like, "You just knocked my son down on the ground. I'm going to like murder all of you." And then he just like takes the injured monster away. And then the scientists spend the rest of the movie saying, "You can't kill that one. He's the nice one. He hasn't hurt anyone yet." But my mind is thinking, but the green one has killed at least 4 people on the boat and possibly ate that lounge singer's face. And then the orange one, he wants to be friends with that one. He's like saving its life. So it doesn't matter if that's the one that you raised from a baby because he's helping the one that's hostile. And then like later on, for no apparent reason at all, the orange one picks up a tree and just starts hitting the green one. And I don't understand what has changed between these two monsters because earlier the orange one was saving the green one's life, and now he's
Well, the orange one didn't know that the green one was a big green jerk, um, because it showed up and it's like, stop hurting him, and then it takes him away, and then when the green one's just sitting there and the orange one shows up, he looks down and he sees like human clothes just sort of sitting
Mhm.
down there, which implies that he just got finished eating a group of people, and that's why he's mad. So he picks up a tree and starts hitting him.
Okay. And you know what? I could actually buy that, but I think by that point I was just kind of checked out of the movie, and so I probably wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. And that's a situation where you have a monster that cannot speak English, so it's very difficult to get across in acting like, okay, this monster is one of the good guys because he's protecting humanity from this other monster. It's very hard to get that across because these people in the suits, they're having to act without actually showing emotions on their face. So they're having to do very difficult acting inside a suit. And then the filmmaker also has to do very difficult storytelling without using any words. I feel like if you took some of the silent movie, like the people who made silent movies back in the 1920s, if you took those guys and moved them into the 1960s and gave them the appropriate budget, they could make some killer monster movies because they, in theory, they know how to tell a story without words. Now, admittedly, a silent film usually had words on the screen in text, but I think they could still find a way to tell that story because they're used to working with that limitation. But then we in the 21st century, we're used to watching a movie with words. And so if somebody points a gun at someone else and says, freeze, give me all your money, we know from that tiny little clue that the guy who said, freeze, give me all your money is a bad guy. But like with two monsters, you don't get that luxury. And so like I probably should have just been paying more attention to see like, oh, okay, like this one thing happened and that clued the orange monster in that he needs to switch sides. But I was just kind of like confused the whole time.
I mean, yeah, no, I can understand where you're coming from. I kind of checked out a little bit as well. Maybe it's because I've just seen so many of these things in the last month that, I can tell, oh, he's the good guy because he's like shaking his head and like waving his arms back and forth, being like, no, no, hurt, no, hurt green guy. It's funny because like we talked about how Rust Hamlin's like, well, I got a theory. No, it's just a theory, but it's possible that some flesh basically regenerated into a whole new Gargantua. So whenever in a Batman comic or in a B movie kaiju flick, when somebody says they have a theory, that is just the
Yeah.
mythology now. It's like in Batman comics, whenever Batman's like, I got this prototype gadget. Like, okay, that's just the
Hmm.
gadget now. Like it's always a prototype. It's always like it never fails in the field. Like you know what I mean? Like that's like a Batman trope that I can't ever get
Or
into.
if
But
Batman and Gordon are at a crime scene and Batman says it's possible that it was laser acid hands Garibaldi, and then it's like Gordon might say, well, I don't think so because laser acid hands Garibaldi is in Arkham Asylum. Well, then whatever Batman said is what happened. Somehow laser acid hands
yeah,
Garibaldi is the one who did it. When Batman says I think, that's what actually happened. So it's very similar to this.
yeah, and yeah. Similarly, in a B movie, when somebody's like, "No, I got this theory that I think this is what's happening." Now, hey, I'm not saying this is what happened because I'm just a doctor theorizing, but I mean, there's no other possible explanation is given, so we just have to take that as like the gospel.
Where else did you want to take this conversation? Because I'm pretty much running out of things to say.
A little history with this. There are three dubs of this movie. The first dub is it was commissioned by the international distributor that was a co-producer of this picture, and apparently it was just like a straight uh, adaptation. Like these were the words in the Japanese version. This is what they translate to in English. This is the international dub.
This movie is actually putting Connor to sleep. That's how bad it is.
And yeah, sorry, that was actually a genuine yawn. So that was the first dub. It was like a literal translation. It refers to the monsters as Frankenstein's, and that was like a dub for a while. But meanwhile, at the same time, Toho commissioned their own dub, uh, and this is, I guess, just to spite Russ Tamblyn. Ishiro Honda was like, "We're gonna get a different actor to voice over Russ Tamblyn." Um, and that's this version. But the Toho dub, uh, it was not seen or even like touched or ever, like I guess, heard until 2017 when Criterion Collection and Janus Films got their hands on the distribution for it. And that's the version we watched, right? Because you watched it on
Correct.
HBO
Yeah.
Max. Okay, yeah, that's the version we watched. Which is weird that the Criterion Collection logo is in front of this because it's not actually in the Criterion Collection. So I think that's
Hmm.
kind of funny. Like it doesn't have a physical release. And then, but then there was another dub as well, and this was produced by somebody else. Maybe it was like just the American producer without. I have no idea, but this guy, he commissioned a dub that does not refer to the monsters as Frankenstein's, and it kind of omits any connection to Frankenstein versus Baragon. And I guess that's the dub a lot of people saw growing up because that's where the word Gargantuas comes from. It refers to the monsters as Gargantuas.
Okay. I'm probably never going to watch that dub, but I am curious what that version of the movie looks like because if they're just using the existing footage, but they're just putting new words over it, then literally you have a monster that just comes in out of nowhere and like then fights the green one a few times. At least in the version we watched, they refer to a monster they created in a previous movie. And so even though this monster just kind of comes in out of nowhere, it doesn't really work in the context of this film, but at least with this, when we both know that this is a sequel to another movie, I think this monster just coming out of nowhere works a little better. But if they're trying to remove this from the context of Frankenstein versus Baragon, I'm very curious how that would work.
Me too. And apparently that dub that refers to them as Gargantuas and kind of removes any connection to the first film, apparently that one does have Russ Tamblyn dubbing over himself.
And you're
But
saying,
what's weird about that one?
oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
I was gonna say, you're saying the one that we watched on HBO Max, that's not Russ Tamlin's real voice?
well, yeah. See, like that's what I was saying earlier. That was the Toho commissioned dub that like didn't even like. My theory is that Ishiro Honda just wanted to spite Russ Tamblyn because apparently he was a terror on set, and so like he didn't even get like him to voice over his own acting. But the one that refers to the monsters as Gargantuas, that producer did get Russ Tamblyn to dub over himself. And the reason he needed Russ Tamblyn to dub over himself is because somewhere in production, the audio for Russ Tamblyn got lost.
Right.
And it became really difficult for them to, like, for Russ to dub over himself because apparently on set, like, he just kept improvising. He was given all this dialogue. He's like, I don't like this dialogue. I'm going to do the opposite of whatever my director tells me to do. I'm just going to improvise most of my
Mm-hmm.
dialogue. And so he did, and then they lost all that dialogue audio, and then he just like couldn't remember what he improvised because it wasn't written down. And so then he had to basically read his own lips and then like try to figure out what he had said.
I I'm just imagining like because this was 60, what did I say, 66 or 69? This is
60,
this
yeah, somewhere
this is
mid 60s,
after
yeah.
West Side Story. So like Russ Tamblyn is probably on top of the world by this point. If he felt like he was above this kind of movie, then I'm wondering why he even agreed to do it. If he just was gonna be this way and say like I'm gonna ruin everything about this movie, like if I've just done West Side Story, then why like some people are going to say, oh, that kind of thing is beneath me. Okay, then why take the job? Like, either the money had to be really good, or maybe he thought, like, like by this point, it's been, like, 10 years, a little more than 10 years since the first Godzilla movie came out. So I'm not really sure culturally when Godzilla became, like, worldwide, like, known worldwide. Was it the Blue Oyster Cult song that kind of kicked up an interest in it in the 80s, or were people in the 70s interested, like people in America, were they interested in Godzilla? Like, I'm not really sure. But I'm really curious what made Russ Tamblyn think, I know better than the people who wrote the script. I'm going to make this better by just doing the opposite of what they say.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And then him thinking that way ended up biting him in the butt later on. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I know that have you seen the film Lost in
No,
Translation?
no.
Okay, I have not either. But that is a movie that's about Bill Murray as an actor, and he goes to Japan to shoot some commercials. And a lot of actors used to do this because you'd go to Japan if you were like kind of slumming, and because you were this famous American actor, they would give you a lot of money. Orson Welles
Mm-hmm.
did this as well, where you would just like just chill and do a series of ads for Japan, and you'd think this is great because I'm a has-been actor, I'm slumming it, and I'm getting some money and doing work, and nobody will ever see it back home. And now, well, because of the internet, nothing is
Mm-hmm.
ever lost. And I think this is a similar situation. However, I don't know if it is the same situation because, like, the whole point of this, like, having American actors appear in Toho productions is because it added an international interest in those movies. So yeah, I don't even know why Russ Tamblyn would do this if he was like he was nominated for like best supporting actor multiple times at the Oscars by
Mm-hmm.
this point. So I don't know if his star was starting to fade or what, but like this is not long after he was in The Haunting. I mean, I'm the only person on planet Earth who thinks that movie sucks, but he's great in it. And I don't think he was nominated for that, but I know he was nominated for Peyton Place, which was 1958, I think. And I know he was nominated for something else a little bit later than that. So I don't know why he got involved with this because apparently he wanted to get Nick Adams again, but like he had already done two of the three movies of this like kind of cross-cultural collaboration, and then they were going to get another guy, but then somebody suggested Russ Tamblyn, and then they got him. So yeah, I don't even know why he agreed to do this.
I'm just imagining like what if they asked like Raymond Burr. I don't even know if he was still alive at this point, but like
Oh no, he was because he was in King of the Monsters, that Americanized version that you watched, and then in 1985 in 1984 the Heisei era of Godzilla started with the Return of Godzilla, and then that movie just forgets all of the interim Godzilla movies, and it is a direct sequel to the original Godzilla. And it's sort of like Halloween
or
2018 before Halloween
or
2018.
the last couple of Terminator movies.
Right. And so that movie, the Americanized version of that, is a sequel to Godzilla King of the Monsters, where they bring back Raymond Burr as Steve Martin, and they like shot new scenes with him, and then like cut him into the existing version of Godzilla or the Return of Godzilla.
Yeah. See, I have that on DVD and had no idea like is this what the original movie looked like, or and then I read into it a little and I was like, oh, okay, they added his scenes later, but I wasn't sure when they added those in. But I was thinking like before they had locked down Russ Tamblyn, like they should have just said, let's get Raymond Burr to play Steve Martin again, and like he just comes in and says like, all right, headquarters, we got another monster. and I'm watching it right now from off screen. I will say this. Maybe this isn't necessarily a compliment about War of the Gargantuas, but it's more of a backhanded slap against the Godzilla movie. But if you take out the humans from this movie, I will say the plot will look a little different, which if you took out Raymond Burr from Godzilla, the plot doesn't really look that different. But like here, if you take out the woman, like that's kind of what clues in the military that. Well, no, you know what? No, I'm not even gonna go there. I was gonna try and give this movie a little bit of a compliment, but then I realized they kill both the monsters at the end, and so like the woman and Russ Tamblyn, everything they do in the movie basically amounts to nothing because they keep saying, "Hey, this is a nice monster, don't kill it." And then the government says we don't care, and then they kill it anyway. So you could take these two out of the movie, and the plot wouldn't really change that much, would it?
No, it should just be about the military, push around like the general trying to figure out the right thing to do, um, and then like new monkey wrenches keep getting introduced. By the way, that ending, like you got to be kidding me with
Yeah.
that. I have seen some lazy resolutions to kaiju conflicts in the past, but this one takes the cake. They just happen to be fighting in the water, and then a new island just happens to volcanically materialize in Tokyo
Mm-hmm.
Bay. Like, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous.
I was looking at the amount of time left. It was like 4 minutes left, and these two monsters were still fighting. And of course, in the '60s, they didn't have 10 or 15 minutes of credits like they do now. They did most of their credits before the movie, and the credit sequence wouldn't be as long. But still, I was thinking, we have 4 minutes left, and they still have like the monsters are still fighting. And then it was like, oh, lava. Oh, the end of the movie. Oh, okay. Like I was really expecting like a third monster to come out, and it's like, oh, that's acid lava hands Garibaldi. He escaped from Arkham and he just created some lava and killed the monsters. Like some creature that just like poked a hole in the Earth's core and like sucked it out with a straw and like spat it at the monsters or something like that.
I really hope Lava Acid Hands Garibaldi is a character you have some kind of art for, so you can just pop him up right now whenever you
Yeah,
reference him.
I'll have to really
Uh,
reference him like in every video now to make it worth it.
yeah,
Um,
to make up for the commission that
yeah.
you purchased from. Uh, yeah. By the way, regarding the ending, uh, it's weird because an island shows up and then the reporters are like, "We got to get away because it's like lava and it's really hot." And they're like, "Well, they haven't been able to find any bodies." Sort of
Yeah.
sequel baiting, and then it's over. I remember I checked the time and I'm like, almost like spitting out my drink because it said 45 seconds. I'm like, wait, what?
I'm just like, what could have? I'm trying to think of a better ending. Like the two little fairy women who summon Mothra. Like that, you see them on a spaceship, and the two Gargantuas are like on the spaceship. They're looking down at themselves, like, did we just get beamed aboard a spaceship? And then the two fairy women say, the humans think you're dead. Welcome to the Giant Monster Initiative. And then you like pan out, and there's Mothra and Rodan and what's the Gamera? They're all there, and they're all just like, "Wah!" And then it's like, maybe to be continued? Question mark. And then like we never see them again.
Yeah, no. At the end, when like it started, like the water started bubbling, Ibira, the giant lobster, should have just shown up and chopped their heads off with its giant claws. That would have just taken care of them. I hate their stupid faces. They look like the inbred like offspring of the gremlin from the William Shatner episode of the Twilight Zone. Uh,
Um, I was
yeah,
expecting the
but
giant squid to show back up. Like at the very beginning, the
oh
squid attacks
yeah,
the boat, and then the green gargantua attacks the squid, and then he turns around, and it's like he said, "Nobody picks on the humanity except for me." And then and I was expecting the squid to come back and like suck them both underwater and be like, "Remember me?" And then Russ Tamlin would be like, "No," and then they all die.
it'd be like in Jason Goes to Hell, that one guy who's a Jason expert. Even though he's been in no other Friday the 13th movies up until that point. And at the end, he's like, "Remember me!" And he's like up in Jason's face, like, "Remember me!" And everyone who watches the movie goes, "No."
He's a he's a he's a
He
he's a
wouldn't
Jason
remember you.
expert because he says, "I have a theory about Jason Voorhees," and then that just becomes canon in the movie.
And then the next movie, somebody else will have a theory, and then that's the
Yeah,
new mythos. But I was gonna say though, like the military basically kills the green one, right? Like it electrifies it to death because it needs water to survive, and they've like lured it to water with electricity, and then the water is electrified, and then they just kind of decide to call it a day before the brown one shows up. Why did they decide to call it a day? Why did they decide, you know what, electricity worked last time, let's do that again?
Yeah, I I don't know. I guess they were just, I feel like almost everyone who made this movie was half asleep. Like Russ Tamblyn is just kind of phoning it in. The director is probably phoning it in. The people doing the effects, like, editing. I don't know how much of this was done in post. I'm assuming because every time you see like a giant monster where it's like picking up a human, that's got to be done in post, right? Where they're doing some kind of predecessor to like a blue screen. But then like most of this would have been done like physically, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just imagining like if any of it was done in post, even those people are probably like half asleep doing that. Like it doesn't seem like anyone brought their A game to this movie.
I think the model work looks
Hmm.
pretty good. It's some of the better miniatures I've actually seen from this era.
Yeah, and
But I think
go.
in like some of the other Godzilla movies, they're actually using stock footage from like Rodan and other stuff
Mhm.
at this point. Um, but yeah, I thought the miniature work here was actually
I will
pretty solid.
say it looks good when it's like if there's like a tidal wave knocks a boat over, it looks pretty good then. Because with miniatures, you have to kind of slow down the footage so that it looks heavier. Because if you just have like a toy boat in a bathtub and then you like make a wave with your hands, it's gonna move too fast and it's not gonna look real, or it's not gonna look like a real boat. Um, but then like when the giant monster like picks up the boat and is like splashing and he like tries to sink it, it looks like a person holding a 2 foot long toy boat playing with it in the water. Like it, those parts don't look as good to me as the miniatures by themselves. Like the tanks, I thought looked pretty good
Yeah,
when they're just by themselves, but then when he's picking up stuff, I'm like, oh, the illusion is kind of shattered a little bit.
yeah, and I think the miniature tanks look pretty,
Hmm.
adorable. When you have like the little toy porcelain people sitting next to them, I think that's like, oh, those don't look very good. But I will say, while I have given this monster fight some grief, them picking up the tanker ships that are like, sorry, the ones that carry what am I thinking of? They're like
Oh, a
big
fairy?
boats. They carry supplies. Not a ferry. They carry like supplies and like shipping containers, and it's a very common word. I'm
It's also
completely
very topical because
blanking
just recently the canal was, and I can't think of it either, but
it.
I know what you're talking about.
Anyways, yeah, but when like one of the Gargantuas like picks it up and lifts it above their head and then slams it into the other one, that was pretty sweet. I can get down with that. And whenever you see they're like running across the countryside and you see their feet just like running through little cottages and little houses, yeah, that's the good stuff right there. I like seeing uh like Japanese stuntmen stomping on like miniature bridges and buildings and stuff. That's though, like I said, that is the inherent mid '60s charm.
Yeah. Um, so would you say you and I were both probably about on the same page on how much we like this movie?
Yeah, I guess so. I might like just as if we had to like give these movies like arbitrary number ratings, my number would be higher than yours. But I think that's just by will of I have a very, very soft spot for these kinds of
Right.
movies.
I was curious how much you would like this because of you being such a big fan of this genre. And I was actually, before we started talking, I assumed you would like it more than I would, just based on how much you like this genre. But uh, I'm not, I'll say I'm not too surprised that you didn't like it, just because I also really didn't like it.
Okay.
Well, what did you have anything else to say about this movie?
Oh yeah, I got like half of my
Oh
notes ready
boy.
to go. This movie is just so no, I'm kidding. Um, I'm actually pretty disappointed by how little there is to
Hmm.
talk. Um, I mean, it's cool to see Russ Tamblyn. He looks like he does not want to be
Hmm.
there, uh, but I don't know. I'm not actually hearing his voice. I think the dub doesn't sound very good. Um, I think that, I mean, that's just kind of a given, I suppose. But like, the audio quality is like really kind of not very good. I've been watching a lot of these kaiju movies in their native Japanese
Hmm.
language, and it's just like one of those things where I mean, obviously, I grew up watching all the Godzilla movies dubbed, but so like I have no issue with people's like words not syncing up with their lips, but it's like one of those things where there's other elements to audio that you don't necessarily think about until you watch like its native tongue, and then you go here, and it's like when people are talking, all of a sudden things like environmental noises just magically don't exist anymore, and stuff like that. And I think the audio quality itself is very kind of shallow, doesn't have a very rich sound to it. It sounds kind of tinny, but I don't know, whatever. It's a live with it.
Yeah. So I guess that means we are at that part where you will choose something that we will be talking about in the next Podcast Boys podcast. I'm very anxious to see what you will be choosing for us, Connor.
Well, I actually have it down between two movies, and I can't really decide which one. So maybe you can give me some help here. I'm not going to tell you the names of the movies, but I will give you the genre they are. Do you want to stick with a monster movie and one that I'm sure we will enjoy more than this, or do you want to watch a sports movie?
I'm going to say monster movie.
All right, this one has been on both of our lists for some time. I'm finally pulling the trigger on it. It's the 2005 King Kong movie directed by Peter Jackson, starring Naomi Watts, Jack Black, and Adrian Brody.
Okay. This is, I'm going to go ahead and give everyone a fair warning. This one's 3.5 hours long, so we'll be, strapping in for a longer podcast with that one. I have this on DVD. I'd say you probably have it also, Connor, on some format.
I do.
But if you don't have a physical copy, I think it's available on HBO Max. I haven't checked, but if I had to guess, I would say it is. I'm going to look right now just to be sure. But yeah, this is a movie. I think I've only seen it once, so it'll probably be basically like a new experience for me because it's been a few years since I've seen this. But have you seen this one before?
I saw it one time way back when it first came out on DVD at a
Oh, wow.
sleepover. I'll probably just watch the theatrical version. I know there's an extended cut, but look, I don't have time for that right now. So yeah, I'm excited to watch it. I recently rewatched the original King Kong in preparation for Godzilla vs. Kong, and I loved it. But I also know that this is kind of a bit of a divisive movie. I know some people really don't like it because they think it's really way too long, but I know there are other people that absolutely adore it. Our good pal Rasco, it's one of his all-time favorite movies, the remake specifically. So I'm excited to revisit it. I recently watched through Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films as well, so I think the timing on this is kind of perfect. This will definitely be coming out after Godzilla vs. Kong, but it'll be fun to watch, now that we have a new Kong movie out.
And no, this is not on HBO Max, but the original 1930s one is. The 1976 movie is. Son of Kong is available on HBO Max. And also THX 1138, which has nothing to do with King Kong, but I was just thinking to myself the other day how I didn't think any human being had actually seen that movie because I've never seen it I've never seen a DVD of that or a Blu-ray, and now here it is on HBO Max. So George Lucas's first big film is on HBO Max. So like I said, nothing to do with giant gorillas, but I just want to throw that out there.
I have seen Son of Kong actually. That movie is really bad.
Okay.
That if you want to see padding, that is a wonderful case study in how to pad a film that is barely feature length. I think it's 70 minutes long, and they're maybe on Skull Island for about 20 minutes.
Well, so if you're interested in watching or listening along with us, you can watch every other King Kong movie just about, and then pretend like you know what we're talking about when we talk about the Peter Jackson movie. But that'll be what we'll be talking about in a couple weeks, and I'm looking forward to it. In the meantime, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you guys in the future. Bye.
Bye-bye.